Good morning. It is Monday morning, and I find it really interesting because the content on Dualistic Unity oscillates in the same way that the content of my life oscillates. And what I mean is that there are periods of my life where I'm quite obviously going through the perception that Ray is learning something. And then there are periods of my life where I recognize that the all of everything is at play. And so it's very much like the oscillating perspective between the individual and the whole, man and God, that kind of thing. And as such, I've noticed that the podcast goes through these waves. Like, well, all of a sudden we'll talk a lot about your own personal liberation from yourself. We'll talk about, being present, being authentic, having relationships that actually are based in reality rather than what you need or desire or fear. We talk about all these very applicable things, and we go through waves of that for sometimes weeks. And then all of a sudden along comes the conversation of God. And the tone changes and the conversation shifts. And I thought it was funny because this morning I ended up getting a stream of comments from somebody on TikTok in response to a video that I had made the other day regarding prayer. Prayer being an indication of doubt and not faith, because you are asking for what you desire or what you fear. And the comments that I've gotten in response have been both positive and negative. Like, oh, wow, I never thought of it that way, that kind of thing. And then some of it was just straight up like, oh, so no God, no belief. Well, you believe in raping children. Like, it's just extreme. Like, it's insane. And so I've just been really enjoying the dialogue back and forth. But I think one of my favorite parts was when somebody said to me, you don't have a right to talk about God. You have no evidence. You're not a religion. And that made me laugh because religion is based on belief. It's the reason you have to believe because there is no evidence. At most, they'll be like, well, Josephus said there was a Jesus. Like, yeah, he didn't say he was walking around fucking healing people, though. He didn't say he was born of a virgin. He didn't say he rose from the dead. Like, even if you can find some scholarly reference to the man named Yeshua, that doesn't imply that that's evidence of everything else, especially given all of the written works that the person is citing were written hundreds of years after the fact. So it's all based on belief. There's no evidence whatsoever. So the problem wasn't that I was speaking without evidence. The problem was that I was speaking and that I wasn't speaking in agreement, that I was saying that the thing that you do every day to soothe yourself and make yourself feel like the world is going to go according to your plan, if you just believe in the right God in the right way and you make your case enough, you will alter the entire fucking course of God's plan. And I'm just saying that that's not an act of faith. That's all I'm saying. That's it. Well, where's your evidence? Just think about it. And that's it. One person said something like, yeah, we'll prove it. And I said, that's a really interesting response when offered the opportunity for self-honesty. Why is this about me? And it's because these organizations, like Catholicism, Christianity, have continued to exist through mob rule, through enough people agreeing loudly and fervently enough that nobody would oppose them, that nobody would dare disagree. And they got so comfortable in that they murdered people without anyone questioning it for years, hundreds of years. And now they're just kind of pissed that they can't keep doing that shit, because I guarantee you, these two fuckers that are talking to me in the comment section of this video would drag me out into the street if they could, yelling that I've been fucking taken over by the devil and looking for a pyre.
Oh, so quick. And they wouldn't want to obviously admit that, but given how much people will cling and hold on to those perspectives and those fucking thoughts and just like needing that validation and just like how easy it is and how quick people will be just to not even question or to have someone do something for them, like even someone wanting you to prove it for them. It's like, why aren't you looking at this yourself? Why aren't you taking this in yourself? And like with the self honesty too, like you can't you can't do anything to convince anyone of anything. But then immediately as I'm saying that, it's like, why would I need to? And it's like all these things, they're things you can do, and things get more clear as you start to recognize, you know, yourself in people and everything. But then you go through situations and you go through stuff, and it's like there is and to your point early on in the episode, like the back and the forth between, you know, being being what you've always thought that you were, and going through things that are different than that, and then getting a sort of perspective of it from not feeling so much like that thing. But there's like this back and forth, and like there is absolutely a sort of, I don't know, reverberation or like rippling from certain things. But it's such an interesting experience to go through that sort of stuff. And I don't know necessarily where I'm going with this. And part of me is like, I don't know where you were like, ah.
So this is
So,
great. I do this where all of a sudden, like I'll be on a trail, let's just say, going along step by step. Suddenly I just lose track of the trail. And I'm like, fuck. And so you can meander around looking for it. Or just pick another direction. Right. And that's something I've noticed I do it sometimes. Like I'll go, "Nah, nah, 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 and I'll just keep going in a different direction. And then all of a sudden it's like I'll find the remnants of the trail that I was on earlier. Right. And it's just funny how that works, because it's like you were saying, one day, that it's really in that, like, that moment of, fuck, what do I do with this? And I guess the answer is, what do you want to do with this? And don't think too much about that. Just do something. Right. And I've been really learning to practice that a lot lately on the podcast as well. It's easier for me in some cases, right? But in other cases, it's just like, oh fuck, I was making a good point. And that's the thing that always gets me, is this need to make a good point, I think. Because then all of a sudden I'm afraid of losing said good point, instead of just being me and saying fuck the point. Like, isn't that the point? Is the point not to just be me? Is that not the point I'm trying to fucking make with everything I'm saying anyway?
yeah, exactly. And I'll absolutely get caught in that too, like thinking that because, and it's hitting me more and more how much I've always thought it's about saying the right thing, saying certain insights instead of being it, and like sharing something that's like like to an insane degree. And so there was like value put on that, and then there's pressure based on that. And then it's like, oh, meanwhile, like I'll listen to someone else or something else, and they're like talking about something, and then they shift very quickly, and it's like there's not a second thought about that. Or they do something else, and it's just like, or they do something that maybe I would judge myself for, and there isn't any of that. And it's just like things continue on, things play out. Like there isn't, you don't know what's going to be best for anyone, and you just within yourself have certain perspectives, and then certain focuses, and then certain spots in which you feel like you got to figure it out, instead of realizing that you are in process all the time, like all the time. Like there's never a spot in which you're doing things right or correctly. And in my own life, like I've had so much hesitation with speaking, like with jumping in to stuff. And it's like even just the willingness to start talking about something and not really know, like I never know where it's going. I don't know where what I'm saying right now is going necessarily, but it's playing out. And so, holy shit, it's not even like you figure out how to do anything. It's just like it's like this scale or spectrum from like rigidity and doubt to faith and relaxation. And everything's reflective of that. Everything's reflective of that. And as I like, it's interesting to go through that spectrum, the back and the forth, and to see it reflected. Cause like I'll get so tense and rigid and hesitant and like doubtful about things. And then, I'll layer on assuming that shouldn't be happening. And that just, continues to cause that to fester in a sense. But then I'll completely forget all the times that I haven't felt like that. Like I haven't all the times that I haven't doubted myself so much or been a little bit more relaxed, and the experience of that and how things just made sense. There was always something to share. There was always something to say. Like, and even if I felt like there wasn't, I had more of a willingness to jump in and just say something. And it's it's just fascinating how quickly I'll forget that experience. Because if you're, rigid, tense, doubting yourself, like it's like feels like the entirety of your experience and like all you've ever known and all you've ever experienced. Because it's like it is in that moment, but it's also like, where's your focus? What are you focused on? Like we were talking about yesterday, the two tracks, like reality versus the stream of thought and things processing. And that thing is processing. And it doesn't have to be the focus. It can, and like if it is the focus, it's not informing whatever's going on. And then it's like you're like fucking crossing all the wires and tying them up instead of just being involved and having faith that like you're going to be informed as you go, as you're talking. Like it's gonna something's gonna be said, something's gonna be expressed, and you don't fucking know where that's gonna fall for anyone. Holy shit. So like, oh man, so you can just say stuff, you can just share something, just like Jesus.
That's all you have been doing.
That's all I've been doing, obviously. Like, oh gosh, yeah, it's I don't know, like I'm always I feel like I'm always saying like I don't know why this feels like it's just sort of making sense, and it's like because it's always the case.
I like that feeling. That's like the majority of my days. It's just starting to make sense. And I love that feeling. It really is. It's a nice feeling. And it's just like, I think the temptation is to think that at some point, you're going to it's going to make sense now. It's always just going to feel like it's starting to make sense because that's the process of actually looking at it, of actually processing it. But it's interesting because, okay, I think it's really helpful to recognize that there are certain things that we talk about that are kind of synonymous with other things. And what I mean is that spectrum that you just discussed between rigidity and faith, or control and faith, um, is the spectrum of division versus being versus unity, right? Like that's the whole point. The more caught up in division you are, the more rigid you are, because the more you have the perspective of another that you are now in potentially conflict with and can be afraid of, the more there is another, the more there is an unknown that you, as separate from that unknown, should be afraid of. And so that spectrum of division is also synonymous with your commitment to your idea of yourself. So the other end of the spectrum, which is being, is less of that idea of yourself. See, it's the same fucking spectrum. Rigidity and ego and control and the perspective of time and your narrative, they all exist more and more on one side of that spectrum and less on the other. It's just recognizing that, and then recognizing that to get in there and to try and manipulate it is a mentality on the other side of the spectrum. It's just recognition. It's all it is. It's just recognition over and over and over again. And as you said, that's when it starts to make sense. Right. But as soon as you're like, oh, now I know, I'm going to do something about it. And then you get in there and you fuck it all up because that urge to do something is based on your own confusion, not recognizing that the you that needs to do something is not separate from the doing that's already happening. And so it's a difference in perspective to a very large degree. It is the spectrum of perspective, in fact. Right. And then all of our emotional content goes with that. Because the farther removed you are from being everything, the more caught up you are in the idea of yourself and thus the idea of everything else, the more fear you will have access to, And yeah, that's true. The same is true in that you will also have more satisfaction in getting those egotistical wants, but they will also be more temporary. Right. So yeah, the roller coaster just keeps getting more violent the deeper you go into that perspective of division. Right? Or you can come back and it's not smooth sailing by any means. It's not linear because people tend to want to get there. Like, oh, if I get out of my ego, it's no more ups and downs. No, if you get out of your commitment to your ego, you don't give a fuck about the ups and downs. You actually look at them as a gift rather than a penance.
Oh, man, and there is that a little bit more appreciation, and when it's because it's not so personal, even things that are happening as you go through, because there can be, like, when you're when I'm feeling a little bit more relaxed about things, just in general, there's, like, a total shift in perspective of, like, my life, Andrew's life, versus when I'm rigid and tense, like, it's It's incredible how it can be, like, all of a sudden it's not so personal anymore, and then there aren't all these it's not like there's all these assumptions that almost end up it's not that they end up playing out, but there's, like, from the fear of things, there's, like, rigidity that comes through that, and just, like, a focus on what's going on and trying to be in control. Like, trying to be in control. I never really thought of myself yeah, and it's just been hitting me more like how unsure of myself I am, and so, while like, as much as that's, you know, not jarring at all, it's just a different perspective, like, all the things that I try to control are the things that are causing the things I'm afraid of to play out, and, like, that's all that's all it ever is, and so, like, attempting to maintain control, it's it's like I've always parsed out different things in my life from, like, hesitancy, talking, tension in my body, blah, 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 but it's all the same. It's all the same sort of stuff, like, and everything I have ever done, everything I've focused on, all of it's the same within the same sort of on a scale, on a sort of spectrum of a need to maintain control versus relax and let go. Like it's all like I never it never, the control conversation, I don't know if that ever hit me in the sense that I thought I was like a control freak or whatever, and that's just a term, but, like, in a sense, for sure. Like, absolutely. In trying to maintain certain perspectives, but it's never been, like, one perspective. It's just, yeah, kind of a mentality or assumption that it could even be possible.
It's funny. Somebody asked me yesterday, they're like, you mentioned faith in some of your videos. What does faith feel like to you? And I responded, uncertain, because that's basically it. And it's just that throughout our life because we've been invested in this idea of us, this idea of our value, this idea of how we fit in or don't fit in, this disconnection that we've invested in, all that stuff. Because we saw the world through that environment, everything that we did, because remember, we're always influencing everything, right? But we were influencing things according to the environment that we perceived. And because we saw ourselves as separate, the influence was divisive. Right. And so the more that we tried to get somewhere, the more divisive it became. And then we suffered from the conflict that was created because we were being divided from reality, trying to get our own way, focused on this false environment, essentially. And so we had influence there in the same way that we have influence in reality through moment to moment interactions. But our influence is always going to be based on how we perceive ourselves and the environment accordingly. Right. So the more you let go of the idea of the division between you and the environment, all of a sudden your influence has different intention. Right. It's no longer trying to cater to fear and the perception that your value can increase. It's no longer viewing people through the lens of competition and comparison. Right. Instead, it's just a state of, well, here I am. Right. And so with that, all of a sudden the influence that you have in your life changes tone because it's no longer trying to act outside yourself to gain something inside yourself. You realize it all starts from within. So everything changes at that point, right? You still have influence, but the environment shifted. Why is the environment shifted? Because your view of your place within that environment has shifted. More importantly, your view of your place as not being that environment has started to dissolve. And all of a sudden everything changes accordingly. Like people ask me why I do some of the stupid shit I do. Like in terms of like, you just spent hours talking to this person for no reason whatsoever. It's like why? It's like because I'm talking to me. Like I don't I don't need reasons to be where I am. The only choice I ever have is how much I want to commit to where I am. That's really it. That's why I get into conversations with people. That's why I do random things, very random things. Anybody who knows me, like I remember Virginia Beach, we all went for a walk. All of a sudden, I just fucked off. I was just running into the darkness, which is where I lost my phone, which caused another adventure later. But the point is that I was just feeling that at that time, and so I did it. And at one point I would have went, oh God, they're gonna judge me for looking foolish and running off into the darkness. And just as soon as I had that thought, I'm like, fuck that. And why? Because it's not about anybody else. It's about me. Why am I judging myself there? Why am I holding myself back? Why am I thinking to myself it's weird to run off into the darkness towards the water? Why? Where's all that coming from outside of this investment and this idea of me that's separate from everything else and therefore has to be careful for its own survival, has to be careful so it can fit in, has to be careful because I might anger the other that doesn't really exist.
Oh, and ah, like being able to be random, even that, like it doesn't seem like it's something that's under control. Like it almost there's a part of me that's like, yeah, but it's got to make sense. There's got to be a reason. There's got to be a purpose. There's got to be a place that it's getting you. Like, and all of it's almost like I can feel even just in that example of walking to the beach. It's like, yeah, if I saw someone do that, I'd be like, hey, what are you doing? Oh, I'll join. And but immediately, like if I were to have that be in that position, there would be the thought that like, oh, this is a dumb thing to do super quickly. And like, oh my gosh. Like just the ability to like take something in any direction and be random and like bring things up. Like there's no oh gosh. Like it's just fascinating how quick we can be so hard on ourselves. Like so hard on ourselves and assume that just because it's something that we're going to bring up or say, it's stupid or it's pointless. And despite like thinking about it and imagining someone else saying it, it's something that I was going to say. So of course I would have a thought about I'd be like, oh, oh shit, I was thinking the same random ass thing right there. Like, oh god, dude, I can't tell you the amount of like fucking barriers I've put in front of that, just assuming like what the fuck? Like what the fuck? Cuz with the randomness, and I guess that it goes with control and just like cuz is uncertain. You bring up something, it's like everyone in the world could think that's the stupidest fucking thing to do ever. It's like it's a possibility, and it's like, why do I care? Like, why do I fucking care if they think that or have that perspective? Like, that's where it it's like if I look at that, then I'm like, fuck, I do. Huh.
Only because you think that the thing that they're judging is you, as opposed to the environment that they perceive themselves to be separate from. That's it. It's not personal. None of it's personal. None of quote unquote their judgment is personal. It's all their judgment. That's the funniest part, right? It's all their judgment. And the only reason you take it seriously is because you still identify with the environment that they perceive themselves to be part of, or rather separate from. Right? We're separate, therefore you're a threat. It's like, no, we're the same, therefore you're dealing with some shit. You okay? How are you doing? And that's the difference. If I'm not threatened by you, then I can actually see your pain. I had this conversation about Bashar the other day, and this person was responding to me, and they're like, well, you seem to be assuming that they're suffering. Because my point with channelers is, because they're always like, well, why can't you just live and let live? They're saying a lot of the same stuff you are, and my point is always, like, so you're willing to let them suffer so you can get insights out of them? That's lovely. What does that say about you? That kind of thing. And we were going through this, and where the hell was I going with this? Oh, 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 did I just shift? Did all of a sudden the fucking path just vanish on me?
I have a thought.
Please jump in there. Perfect
It's
timing.
suffering. Yeah. No, because they'll assume that or they'll play the card that like, oh, well, I don't know if they're suffering or not. But then if you look at the person and look at yourself and what you're getting out of them, you're not seeing them, you're seeing their insights. So there's almost like that you're looking at indicates a an it's almost like an indicator that they are suffering in a sense because the value you're driving isn't them. It's not seeing them, it's seeing what they're expressing.
We have a question. And what do I mean by let them suffer? And this was exactly what the person answered or asked me. And I'm glad you brought me back. Thank you. Appreciate that. Um, this person does not believe that they're the source of their own insight. They are channeling insight from a perceived external source, right? And it's just perceived externally because they really only just know themselves. And so they sit down in a room and they share insights, but they're not sharing the insight. And so they actually have to psychologically disconnect. So poor Daryl doesn't actually get to be in the room sharing as Bashar. And because Daryl doesn't get to be in the room, Daryl doesn't get to participate in the insights, right? Which is sad. And so somebody asked me, well, okay, it's a valid point. Maybe there's a bit of suffering there. Poor guy doesn't, recognize his own power and can't be, actually enjoying the act of sharing these insights with people because he can't be there. Right? It's like, okay, that's a valid that's a valid point. It's like it is a valid point if you really want to think about it. Right. And the worst part is, and this was their counterpoint, well, he can just watch the tape of himself as Bashar later and gain the insights that way. And he can't even do that because the insights that Bashar is saying all revolve around the fact that you are the source of your own insight and power. In order for Daryl to actually take that in, he would have to willingly surrender Bashar. He would have to surrender Bashar to learn from Bashar. That's the point. And that's so true for fucking everything. And this is exactly it. You want to connect with God? Let go of God. That's really it. Because the idea of God, it's just another barrier that validates the idea of you, which is what separates you from everything else. It's just another commitment to that division. It's like, well, how do you know God if you don't believe in God? It's like you are God. Like you're the universe right here. This is it. You're reality. Talking. I don't need to believe in you. I can see and interact with you. And everybody's like, God never talks. God's talking all the time. We're talking all the time. We're talking all the time. The problem is that we get so caught up in the superficial concepts that we forget to listen to what's really being said.
Yeah, like the statement, "Put no God before me." And that my perspective on God has and, like, what people mean by that has shifted from this, thing to just authority, really. Just someone to tell you the right or the wrong thing to do. And it's
Sky Daddy.
Sky Daddy. Sky Daddy, which and it's because like, I've always thought of religion as, like, kind of its own sort of thing, but it's just another example of desire to have certainty and control. It's just another example. It's like everything in reality are examples of this spectrum from, like, certainty and control to relaxation and letting go. And so even the thought about having someone else to look to for how to live your life, like, immediately the imagery I get is just here and then someone above or like a group of people above or a certain type of thing or another thing instead of like me me being not at the top but just like not anything above, like it's almost like kind of being uh like I don't mean this in like a egotistical way, but like being at the top in the sense of just expression, like just being an embodiment of just reality. It's like there can't be anything above you. Doesn't mean there's anything below you. It's it's just you are what you are where you are as reality. Like and there's so many there's so many ways that we look to like I look to do reality correctly or hesitancies because I think there's a way to or assume that my perspective on things is indicative of the truth at all instead of just being like, oh, there's no one to look to for like what to say next, what to do next, what to do with anything. And so all I got is me right now. Why do I think that I can't make a decision? Why do I think that I can't do something as myself? Like, where is that coming from? Because it's like a desire to look to someone else to find a right way or a right answer or a right path or a correct thing. And like, without so much of an idea of like an authority figure that like, and God is a huge one. It's like God has the right way, despite all of that shit just being humanity coming up with ideal ways to live that like we don't even do. Like people who follow that stuff like don't even do those things. It's just it's like you can tell yourself that you are, but then it's still like you can't lie to yourself. And it's like if you're feeling separate from everything, it's like through lying to yourself and assuming that you can't, but you can't escape yourself. So there's not even a way to do that and like try and repress a bunch of stuff. Try to avoid certain things and like that stuff's all in there. Like you're just avoiding yourself. You're just avoiding, expressing yourself authentically just because it's like you think that there's something wrong with it because you think there's a right way to do something or a wrong way to do something instead of just you being what's happening. Like I'm just yeah, it's like there's not even a way to fucking measure anything. There's not even a way to obviously not a way to have a guarantee of anything, but like you can't even measure how something goes. Like a podcast episode, for example, like every single episode is its own thing. Like there's not a way to compare it. There's not a way to compare it to another podcast. Like, well, people will try to do that, by like looking at the size, looking at the audience, looking at reviews, looking at blah, blah, blah. But that's not an indicator. That's not an indicator of anything. Like that thing is its own thing, just like everything is its own thing. Every person, every situation, every experience, every day, like it's all entirely its own thing. Like you are your own thing. There's no way to measure how you're doing. There's no way to get a report card day to day, moment to moment, year to year. But like we'll try to. We'll try to. And then based on where we assume our report card ends up, it's like we'll feel good about things. Look back at our life and feel good about how we've lived it. It's like, yeah, but how are you living it now? Like what's your experience right now? How much rigidity is looking back at everything you've ever done causing you? Like, and how much and it's which, you know, someone doing that doesn't want to hear that, like, yeah, but that's not you. That's not actually the reality of the impact of your life. It's not actually it. Like that's not actually your life. So yeah. Hmm.
It's interesting. We were talking a lot about, I guess, the nature of reality, right? Because when you let go of this perspective of you needing to fit in and there being others and all of that, and you really start to look at what this is, then you start to recognize that this is intelligence in motion. Like if you were to take, and this exists on YouTube, I encourage you to go and check it out. There's a video, it's an animation of all the flights going to and from Europe, from North America. And if you look at how they all go back and forth and interconnect and do all that, it very much looks, like synapses that are just firing. Okay, and from different parts of the earth. And when you look at a crowd of people all intermingling with one another, they look like fucking blood cells. Like they look like cells walking around. And so we see intelligence in front of us all the time, but we can't recognize that it's intelligence because we're separate from all of it, right? We're separate, so therefore it's separate. This is all chaos because I can't understand myself within it because the self I'm focused on doesn't really exist in that way, right? And so when you start to let that go, you start to see these incredible things. And I wanted to upload this and I wanted to share this with everyone. Hold on a second here. So this is, give me a second. This is a picture of the cosmic web. The cosmic web is basically the largest, I guess, big picture view that we have of the physical universe as we know it. So if you were to keep zooming out as far as you can, outside of the Milky Way, to recognize the Milky Way is part of something even larger, and then that is part of something larger, and that is part of something larger, and so it just keeps getting larger and larger and larger and larger. That whole large thing I just described is a fucking dot on this picture. What you're seeing here are actually flows of galaxies and nebulas and all kinds of cosmic stuff throughout what we know as existence. Like we would not even be a pixel in this photo. And so this, when we look out at the universe from a far enough perspective, is what we see. Universes, or rather galaxies and stars and whatnot flowing. Because remember, Earth and our solar system is moving. The Milky Way is moving. They're all moving. And they're going along these channels, and they look like that. Now, that said, I'd like to share another photo with you. This is a comparison between your neural network in your brain and a chunk of the cosmic web. Can you see the similarity? And the only difference is that we perceive the neural network as being gooey and made of meat. Whereas we recognize what we're looking at in the cosmic web is quite obviously energy, despite the fact that it's massive fucking bodies of physical matter moving around. It looks like energy. So the only thing we're seeing here is the same intelligence expressed on a different scale from a different perspective. You're seeing the inside of your mind expressed as infinite scales of mind. And you get the experience of all of that as you. And yet we can't see that this is all intelligence because we look at ourselves as separate. You can't see that the cosmic web is your neural net because you are identified as the body, as the gushy meat puppet, rather than the same energy that is being expressed as above, so below.
Whew. Whenever you share those images, it really puts into perspective just just how little we know, like how silly to assume that we're in control of something and just like, oh my God. Like is like so in that situation, like zooming in and then imagining like Earth and just like what's going on Earth. And as you zoom out, like it gets sillier and sillier and sillier and sillier, and how it's almost like there's this fog, like just a fog around, but like then I start wondering like how I start wondering how it happens. Like how does that happen? Like as I'm focused on that, it's like, well, it's kind of happening for me right now. Like wonder about that. Don't wonder about the earth and the fog. Like because when as I start to wonder, I'm like, damn, how could intelligence, and again, it's like so limitless.
How could you?
Exactly. Exactly. And it's like, wait a second, why am I wondering how? It's like, just look at myself. It's like, who am I looking at? It's like, well, right there, you're perceiving a division. You're perceiving yourself as separate. You're not. You're not. And so, oh, that's how it's just like if cells in a body started thinking they were just the cells, it's the same sort of thing. It's like it's an assumption and it goes for like all the scales of everything that you do in your life. Like it's all scales of this perspective, and there's a response, and it's not like because sometimes I'll think like, oh, it's like there's a punishment to assuming that you're separate, and it's like no, there's a beauty in it. It's just again because there's not an absolute perspective necessarily, like the paradox and everything. Like there isn't that absolute that you're not, but there is always the potential for either, and like and everything kind of is informative of that. Like everything's informative of what you're focused on, what your priorities are, like where you give your attention and focus, and all of it kind of circles around it. But again, it's not like there needs to be avoidance necessarily. It's just understanding because it's not that things are doing things to you. It's like it's still that flow, even the doubt, even the concern, even the hesitation, even the tension. Like who's saying that there's a right or a wrong flow? It's just what it is. Like how much am I thinking that it should be different, but then it's like different from what? And then it's just self-honesty. And then it's just like, well, what am I doing? What am I? Why do I think this versus that? And you can only be honest with yourself. I can only be honest with myself. Like no one can convince me of anything. I can't convince anyone of anything. And when you dig in to that, any idea of knowing what's best for someone, teaching someone, telling something to someone gets absurd. Like so absolutely fucking ridiculous. And at the same time, it's like there's less weight. There's like way less weight if you stop assuming that there's anyone else to change or an ability to change anyone else or have control over. It's just control. It's just fucking control.
It's that idea that change isn't happening already unless I'm in there making it happen. And it's so funny because all of this comes back to that perspective of I. Who do you mean? Do you mean you, the individual? Or do you mean you? Everything. Right? Like when you say you're wrestling with doubt, you're wrestling with conflict, you're wrestling with judgment, you're doing all that. Yes, we are. Yes, we are. Right? And it changes as one is willing to change. Not everyone. As you change, every ripple you make changes, which ripples throughout the rest of you. We look at it as changing other people, but that's just more division. That's just more control, right? We are all the same tapestry. We're all the same environment, right? If all of a sudden one part of the tapestry changes, it necessitates the change of everything else, right? The tapestry has changed. Change is what's happening all the time. You don't have to make it happen. You just have to recognize what are you contributing to it. How much are you interfering with it out of your own need and fear, as opposed to just going with it as it happens? Because that's where you have influence in your attention to change as it happens. But then we want to control change before it happens. Oh, there's going to be change later on. I need to decide what's going to happen there. It's like you're not paying attention to where you are now. Which is why we have regret, right? Because all of a sudden there's these moments that we've missed because we were looking forward or backwards. And then we fucked something up because we weren't paying attention. We're like, God damn it. And I fucked that up. And now we're not paying attention again. And we fuck up something else. Right? And it's all just this idea that we can fuck something up, isn't it? Right? And that's really it, is this investment in ourselves. Like if you want to talk about the cosmic fuck up, it's this investment in myself is separate. Because that's when I start knocking shit over, isn't it? That's when I start bumping into people and not giving a fuck. That's when I'm willing to step on other people, is when I view them as other people. And the only way I can view them as other people is to view myself as separate. And the only reason I want to do that is because I want to feel like I'm in control. Like I can get what I want without it having an impact on anyone else. You see, that's it. I want to chase my millions. I want to chase my riches. And I don't want to think in any way whatsoever that someone else is losing because of it. And so I won't view them as me. So I can ignore their plight.
Because as soon as there's that, like the sole focus on yourself, getting somewhere, doing something, it's like and that prioritization, it's like you can't possibly see yourself in everyone. Like you immediately it's like it's necessary. Like you need to see yourself as separate, which comes with the entire spectrum of all of everything, but it's not to say that that spectrum isn't there if you're not doing that. It's just it's like a, I don't know, different spectrum almost, or just less concern about the spectrum, because it's like that none of it means anything about you. Like that it's what's happening right now. It's what's playing out right now. And it's again the reign in hell versus serve in heaven. Like It's it. Think you have control or let go and see and just
Because what are you letting go of? Your conflict?
that's it. That's it. And like to to assume to like trade the experience of like being relaxed that is a moment to moment experience like that is your experience. Like your experience some comes from you. Like it's not in a situation. It's not in a thing you purchase or way you look. It's right now. Like right now, what's your experience like? Right now, what's your experience like? And how much is factoring into that being pushed and pulled and swayed and all over the place? And as that shifts, then it's like the thought of trading anything else, like the thought that it could possibly come from anywhere else doesn't make any sense. It's not like understandable anymore. Like how what do I mean in a situation, in a purchase? It's like that's absurd. That's ridiculous. It's so crazy to think that it would be or from someone else's validation like what? What? And it seems clear now, but then again, like at the same time, there's very much a side of me that's like, what do you mean? Well, that'd be scary. What if what if there's never and it's like, what am I even thinking? Like never getting for, validation, whatever. It's like, I don't need why the fuck would I need someone who else is? Who else is there? Someone can say something. Someone could say something to you, but that's not what it is at all. At all. And where's it coming from? Where's it coming from? It's coming from them. If they oh man. But if they see themselves as separate, they need they need to judge you.
Because they're judging them. Right? Judge not, lest ye be judged. Right? It's not a punishment, it's a correlation. Right? If you judge, you will feel judged because you're validating judgment. You're participating in the environment where judgment even makes sense. It's the only way you can continue to judge, right? So if you have to stay in that environment, if you have to stay in that mentality to judge, you will feel judged because that mentality is rooted in division. And thus, other people whose judgments are just as valid as yours. And that's the whole point. We are really good at getting really lost in this idea of ourselves. That's really all it is. And what's funny about it is that it's not this huge problem, and it will always be an option. And the only solution, if you want to call it that, is awareness of the problem. Right? It's just like any other addiction. You become aware of the destructive habit, and then you stop doing it. And you stop doing it because you recognize it as destructive, not because you should stop doing it, not because others are telling you to stop doing it, because that shit never lasts. Right? You actually have to see it out. You actually have to see it for what it is, which is why I am the way I am when it comes to people, leaving fucking, harsh comments and being judgmental pricks and doing all that because I see myself. I'm like, okay, I'm obviously working through something there, so I'm going to give myself the opportunity to do so. Recognizing that that has nothing to do with being pleasant or quote unquote unifying and everything to do with being yourself. Because everything that's informed you or your perception of who you are up until this point has also done the same for the quote unquote other that you're interacting with, which means that you are both perfect for each other right now. Because you are each other. Whatever you do is what's meant to be done. The less you think about it, the more you just be yourself, the more that becomes obvious. But it's that I'm going to do what I think I should do to become unifying. I'm going to do what I think I should do to become a good person. That shit's just going to keep you weighed down, because that's really all we're doing. All this conversation's about. All of this judgment, all of this conflict, all this war, all this greed, all this fucking pollution, all this shit is just our way of saying, I am deeply unhappy with the environment I perceive myself to be separate from. We are saying something underneath all this shit. We just don't want to hear it because we're not actually having the discussion that would allow it to come out, which is the discussion of existence itself. We're so busy talking about democracy and the economy and fucking politics and religion, belief in God, all this shit. Nobody's talking about the root, that we are existence, that we exist. And in that, we are existence. We don't want to talk about this because it removes all the fun, doesn't it? Well, which God do I pray to? No. And well, who do I vote for? No. Right? It really puts you squarely back in the point where it's like, it's you. It's you. And what you do right now changes everything. What you do right now changes everything. Not because you're trying to change everything, because if you do, that's the poison, but because you are everything. So what do you want to ripple out? What do you want to embody? Do you want to embody that everything is okay because it's you? Do you want to embody the fact that everyone is okay as they are because they're you, in the same way that you're okay as you are? Do you want to embody being change itself? So no matter what idea you have of yourself, you always know it's not the truth. So that way you give everybody else that freedom too. Because that's really it. That's the ripple. You're either telling people that they're okay to be themselves because you're okay with being yourself, or you're telling them that it's not because it's not for you. And that's the underlying conversation we're having under all this stupid shit. And it's a conversation we're having with ourselves. As above, so below.
Oh. And so we're always expressing that perspective. Can I be myself or not? And can anyone else be themselves or not? And if I'm not willing to be myself, then I'm saying that you can't either. And everything that I do has to be expressed in that way. Like there must be judgment. There must be, because like, oh man, it's like I'm saying, I'm saying that if I can't be myself, then you can't be yourself. But like we say those things, like we'll speak that out loud through judgment, saying like, "Oh, what a dumb thing," you know, dumb thing to do, dumb thing to say, and like if you're whether you're expressing it or internalizing it, it's the same sort of expression, the same expression because it's just yourself too, and like as we're having this conversation today, like I'm going through all these thoughts about like almost like there's got to be a right thing to say, like how is this going, how am I doing, like all these sort of thoughts, like how do I be myself, how do I even express that, like exactly, it's it's what's happening, it's what's going on, but like I'll have almost this secondary perspective of myself, like that's like this fucking overwatch that's like you down there as I'm looking down at myself being like, you're fucking stupid. You have nothing going on, like nothing to share, nothing to say, nothing to add, nothing to express, nothing to of value to offer at all. And like it'll feel like that as I'm going through something. And it's like, it's almost like that's maybe always there. It's like, am I giving it attention? Am I thinking that it actually has a point? And if so, why? Because that's the same as looking at it's the same as someone else doing the same thing to me and wondering, oh, do they have a point or not? It's like, if not, if I recognize that that's myself expressing something to itself, it's like it wouldn't hit like that. But it's it's like interesting to be talking about it and like feeling it sort of at the same time, and then there'll be another part that's like, you know, why do you gotta talk about this right now? Like, why like, you should be able to not just, like, have this type of conversation that's a deeper conversation. It's like, it's what's happening right now, and now I'm, like, feeling like I have 3 voices going on. It's like, "Am I losing my mind, bro? Am I losing my"
No, but you have a limitless one, and so you can compartmentalize yourself as many ways as you'd like, and we do. I got my business self, my religious self, my personal self. Like all that shit, and yeah, that's kind of it. But the recognition that you're always doing what you're doing. Like you're doing what you're doing. This is it. This is what's happening. That's why I always laugh when it's like, "What's meant to happen?" Well, did it happen? Yes, and then it was meant to happen. Like it's just you don't have to be in there controlling it. It's just that because we don't derive any satisfaction from not knowing the ripple that we have, right? There's no I'm making a difference. There's no sense that I am helping others. There's no sense of egotistical high whatsoever, right? In the same way that there wouldn't be an egotistical high if you were just sitting in a room dealing with your own shit, because you're just dealing with yourself. But that's why we like perceiving others, is because then we can perceive either, their pain is separate from us, and therefore we don't have to do shit about it, or we can perpetuate that pain because we don't have to do shit about it, despite the fact that it comes back to us each and every fucking time. Right? Like this is a closed circuit. There's nothing that you do that isn't going to come back. It's going to come back. It may not come back in the same form, but it's going to come back because it all comes back to you. You know, we don't even recognize that that shit happens in real time. Okay. So, like, somebody gets mad at you for making a video that threatens them. Okay. And so they lash out at you. Are they hurting you? Are they lashing out at you? Or are they lashing out at their assumption of you? And did you identify with that assumption? Are you protecting yourself by identifying with that assumption? All of a sudden you're like, oh, fuck, they're talking about me. And you're getting all bent out of shape. Or do you recognize it's an assumption? Because they're hurting themselves. And if you hold on to the assumption that they're talking about you, you're hurting yourself. And it's instant. It's instant. And it corrupts everything that we do. And it all comes down to this fucking illusion. This is why when people get mad at me, I'm just, all right, you do your thing. And sometimes I'll fuck with them. Sometimes I'll have a little bit of fun. Sometimes I'll point out that, they're really just talking to themselves. And other times I don't bother at all. Because the answer is like, well, what's the right thing to do there? Whatever you do. Some days you're going to feel like taking that shit on and having a conversation. Other days you're going to go, I'm dealing with enough shit. Fuck it. I'm just going to leave that person alone. What's the right answer? Yes. Right? Because there is no right answer, because you don't get to see how it plays out. But so much of, well, if I don't talk to them now, how are they going to face their own shit, comes from another urge to be self-important. Who do you think they're talking to? You or themselves? Who do you think you're talking to? You or yourself? And that really does change everything that we do in the world, doesn't it? Because if you are the point of your own experience here, if you're learning from yourself, then the same is true for everyone. And the lack of faith you have in them is the lack of faith you have in you. And so this is where that faith thing is so very interesting, because, man, religion points at it and misses it entirely. Faith has nothing to do with belief. Nothing. Because that is not faith. That is doubt. That is another urge to control and self-define. Right? Because in order for you to believe, you have to have a division between the believed in and the believer. And that's just you validating yourself. I'm believing in the right thing. I believe in the good thing. I believe in the unifying thing. And nothing sounds more fucking divisive than that shit, eh?
Mm-mm. But, you'd maybe have a conversation with someone that's, where right now, like, talking about existence and the reality of things not being divided, and faith in yourself being faith in other people, and faith in other people being faith in yourself, like them going hand in hand. Like most people won't want to look at that at all. Even like, even not that it's like be close enough or whatever to be willing to talk about it. And there's actually a little bit of a shift for myself, because like I for so much of this podcast, I've thought it was conceptual, about saying the right thing, about like blah 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 blah. But like there is also the side that at least I was willing to have a conversation about this. Like I've never had that perspective. I've never had the thought that like, oh, even just having the conversation is is a thing. Like it's a conversation that a lot of people like don't want to look at, or like will say they don't understand, but it's like no, you just don't want to look at it. It's not that you don't understand it, you're unwilling to like look at the things that are stopping you from having a conversation, or being in a spot where it could even make sense. And so there's a willingness there. It's not like this sort of one stop jump shift sort of thing. It's like each and every time, you go through something, or you're willing to question something about yourself or whatever, it's like getting you closer in a sense to even just being willing to have a certain conversation. But there's all these things you got to let go of, and perspectives you got to let go of in order to even see that. Because now it's like there's a lot in this at this point in the podcast, and I'm sure anyone listening on the live stream, if you've been around it all, like there's a certain, it's like there's like checkpoints almost, it feels like, where there's there isn't so much you got to necessarily work through, but there's and so you're kind of not starting from a certain spot, but like you're at a point where it's a close sort of in and out. But and it's not that anyone's far from that. It's with like a bunch of things to work through, but it's just like it's just one thing that impacts us moment to moment, like a focus, a priority that impacts us moment to moment, and that's it. And there's a lot maybe reinforcing, all the other bunch of things to let go of is just reinforcing one thing. It's reinforcing your sense of division.
And this is why for me the podcast isn't really a thing. This is just me talking to myself. Like, do you think that you enjoy talking to me because I'm talking to you, or because I'm talking to myself?
To yourself.
Because if I was talking to you, that'd be kind of a pompous thing to do, wouldn't it? Right? I mean, who the fuck am I to tell you anything? But the idea that I need to tell you anything at all is what sinks both of us. It's what fucks us both up, right? And so I just show up. I'm just here, working on my own perspective that you need to learn anything. Because who am I talking to? Who needs to learn? What do I need to learn? How much of a journey am I perpetuating? How much of my own suffering am I perpetuating? And what do I mean by me? And so this is my self-dialogue. This is my experience of me. And dualistic unity is just a facet of it. But it is my conversation with myself. And that's why it exists. Right? And it's just because there are people who are having a conversation with themselves, and then they talk to other parts of themselves who aren't having a conversation with themselves, and they start to think that doing so is crazy. And so, like you said, like we're not doing anything here except just showing that you can do that. Like by showing ourselves you can do that. And isn't that funny? That in just allowing yourself permission to just be yourself, you are creating an environment for yourself to continue to practice that fucking lesson because you're doing it for you. And that's the most efficacy you can have in general, because then it's enthusiastic and genuine and authentic and it comes from you instead of some moral fucking platform or some obscure idea of good and evil. It comes from you and sensitivity to this moment, here and now. And that's what we mean by faith, because none of that implies control, but everything in that implies self-honesty and the importance of it. That said, we got like 4 minutes left here, and so I just wanted to make a quick announcement. We have 2 tickets left for our California mini retreat. If you have not already bought a ticket to the California mini retreat, I highly recommend that you join us. This is going to be a dope retreat, and it starts 1 month from today, March 11th. So that's April 11th to April 15th. We're going to be near Big Bear Lake. Check out the listing on the website, dualisticulunity.com. Under events, you will see the 2024 California mini retreat, and you can check out all the photos and all the details there. Likewise, our Colorado mini retreat is now publicly available on dualisticulunity.com. I don't have the QR code available at the moment, but you can just check that out under events. And that Colorado mini retreat is going to be on May 30th until June 3rd. This is an extremely 420 friendly event, so much so that the place that we're at actually comes with sterilized bongs and some grinders, and the clock is always set to 420. There's a movie theater in the basement, pool table, hot tub. We always barbecue. It's going to be fucking dope. And if you've never done hot knives, this is something I have in mind. That said, after this, we're going to be on Patreon. So if you haven't joined us on Patreon yet, this is definitely the best day to do so, as it's a tier 1 call. And you can join tier 1 for only $5 a month. We also have a 7-day free trial in case you're hesitant. But if you would like to help support Dualistic Unity, just being here, doing whatever the fuck it's doing, join us on Patreon. Tier 1, Tier 2, or Tier 3. Tier 2 and Tier 3 get to chat with us 5 days a week. Tier 3 saves $350 on all retreat tickets. There's also awesome coupon codes for workshops and all kinds of shit. It's worth it, is what I'm saying. But aside from that, I just really appreciate everybody being here. One last announcement. We have a YouTube channel. If you haven't actually subscribed to our YouTube channel, I highly recommend you do, because while we are a podcast, and that's definitely where we do most of our stuff, we also have some kick-ass movie reviews. I just figured I'd say I always have movie reviews. You see how it always comes together like that? I have no idea. Movie reviews, and I suggest watching those on YouTube because they actually have some of the clips from the movie in there. I work very hard at those as I am kind of a movie enthusiast. So definitely check out that playlist. It's something that I'm rather fond of, because movies are a big part of my life. I love stories, like just stories as a whole, books, movies, fucking spoken word legends, like shit like that. Like I just love it. And so when I run across something that has something deep and insightful, especially about your relationship with yourself, I love to recommend it. And we have a number of those movies on the movie review channel. I'll pass it over to Andrew now, but we'll see you on Patreon.
Yeah, the movie reviews, I really appreciate all of the clips that you add in there. They're really fun, and all those movies, like they've opened my eyes in a lot of different ways. So yeah, the movie reviews. Oh, there we go. I always tie them together. It's like movie reviews. Yeah, it's like one little whole thing. But yeah, and the retreat. Check out California. 2 tickets left. Only 2 tickets left. I'm very, very excited for this one. It's in a really dope spot, and I'm feeling, in general, more relaxed than I have in a long time. So yeah, super pumped for that. It's been a very fun chat. And
and quickly, a shout out to our viewers on X Twitter right now. It shows that we have some viewers on X Twitter. So if you're on X Twitter, and that's what I'm calling it, because fuck Elon, feel free to retweet or like or comment or do whatever the fuck you do on X Twitter. Appreciate it so much. Thanks for joining us.
bye, everyone.